whole lot more rollouts from lenders. So if you have a lender you're working with, by all means, stay in touch with them. Likewise, the title company, they have to be part of your team also for you to be successful. So, stay in touch with them also. Okay, presenting and negotiating offers. You that don't know me, my name is Randy Borostek. I'm a coach and I'm a mentor here. And I've been doing this for 25 years. I was born into the business. Actually, my dad was a broker. And at the age of 91, he just hung up his license finally. He used to teach also for the National Association. He was a great guy. Anyhow, so I'm kind of following in his footsteps, wanting to do more teaching and less brokering. But I have enough experience probably to answer most of your questions. If I can't answer them, by all means, I'll get back to you with them. Just curious, how many people here are all new to the business, less than 6 months? Okay, so yeah, this is pretty much a new crowd. Anybody here with any experience more than 6 months? Anybody has done? Sam, yes.
A little more than 6 months.
You've done more than 2 deals, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
3 again.
Sam will help us also in presenting this material today. First, let's start with the copy of the PowerPoint. Not the workbook, but the workbook, that'll be second. Okay, our agenda today is to define the listing agent's role in accepting and negotiating offers for the seller. Okay. In addition to that, define the buyer's role, buyer agent's role in preparing the offers and presenting them to the seller and the listing agent. And we're to define both agents' roles in negotiating the counter offer to acceptable terms. Now that is pretty much the process of what you're going to see. You have a listing, for instance. You're going to get a phone call some weekend after there's been multiple showings. The buyer agent's going to call you and say, I'm bringing you an offer. Is the property still available? Yes. Okay. Then there's a series of questions that that agent should be asking you, and there's a series of questions that you should be asking that agent also. It's called posturing yourself. Just a little bit of notation on what negotiating is. Negotiating is a skill, and like any skill, the rudiments can be learned. Negotiation is a process. This is not an event. It's not something you just sit down, you go through and get done. It takes place over a period of time. Part of that time is in the beginning, you're posturing yourself with the other agent. Okay, in order for negotiation to proceed, the process must involve some sort of mutual movement. There can't be a stagnation in the process or in the conversation. Once there's a breakdown in the conversation or it stagnates, you're not negotiating anymore. You're in what they call an impasse. It should not be viewed as a negative viewpoint, such as haggling. You're more positive. Negotiation is the basis of our marketplace, and that's where sellers and buyers arrive at values. Negotiation is also a problem-solving process. You're trying to figure out what the problems of the seller are that you're negotiating against, and likewise, they're trying to figure out what your buyer's problems are. It's an entirely voluntary process. The results are only what is agreed to upon by the parties. That makes sense. And it must be in writing because it's in real estate. Okay? You get no more than the other party is willing to give, and you will give no more than you are willing to give either. Everybody thinks that, oh, I'm going to grind this out, I'm going to really get a really good deal for my client. But the truth of the matter is you're not going to get anything more than the other side's willing to give you. Unless you know something about the other agent and that seller, maybe that he lied on a polygraph machine or he cheated at poker last Friday night, so you can, I don't know. It's just, you're not going to have anything over your opponent. It's not an adversarial relationship, so don't start out being that way. Negotiation, this is a collaborative style when you're working in real estate. It's not, like I said, an adversarial style. If you run up against somebody that's an adversarial style, that's usually a person that's a grinder, that somebody wants to win. So there's always a win-lose situation for them. They're not looking for a win-win. They'll only feel good walking away from that negotiating table if they know they won and only they won and the other person lost. If you run up against somebody like that, it's going to take a little bit more work, and you might want to try to assess that in the beginning and look for another buyer or another seller to work with. Truthfully, I mean, brain damage is pretty deep sometimes. That's the competitive style that I was talking about. Back to the collaborative style. This is the best type of negotiation. This is a win-win situation. The buyer feels that they win, the seller feels that they win. Getting to that point is more often going to close. If you get into a situation where there's a win-lose, okay, the person that is losing, as it gets closer to the contract, they're going to be the ones that rescind. They're going to be the ones that are trying to get out of the contract because they just don't feel good about it. They know they're losing on this deal. So always try to set up a win-win situation. This is the competitive style I'm talking about. They're out to just win. They're not necessarily out to sell the property, they're just out to win. These people are generally well not liked, and they generally don't consummate a lot of agreements either, because they fall apart, because the other person feels they're losing and they rescind. Okay, as a buyer broker planning and preparing the offer, keep in mind, the stronger the buyer's emotional level is, the greater the seller's power. Think of that. Buyer's really emotionally attached to the home. Who has more power in that negotiating? Seller does. Okay. The more the buyer's needs, the greater the power of the seller. Same thing. Buyer, you're coming in with your buyer, and the buyer needs, a discount on the price. They need seller's closing costs kicked in. They need, an early possession. They need a rent back. They need, oh goodness, just a ton. It's like a grocery list, okay? The more needs they have, the more power you're giving to that seller, okay? It's just an old saying. Whoever has the most needs has the less power. Same with the seller, okay? If the seller's saying, no, I need full price, I'm not paying anything, you got to buy it as is, there's no inspection, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they don't have a lot of power in the market. It switches to the buyer. Okay, as a listing broker, planning and presenting a buyer's offer to your seller, keep in mind to ask questions of the buyer broker as the motivation and qualification of the buyers. What motivates this buyer? Are they qualified? You're going to have those answered before you go in and talk to your seller that evening. Okay? If you don't, you're not going to look very professional. To what degree are the buyers motivated, and are they flexible to the terms? So if I don't like your offer, Mr. Buyer Agent, can I counter this? Are they flexible to that? That question needs to be asked. What is the buyer's timeline? Are they flexible with that? And how long have they been shopping for a home? A year? Woo, okay. Well, it's obvious by your offer that they're going to continue for another year. All right, let me ask you. Everybody's been through the pre-licensing program. You got your license and everything, and you may or may not have worked on a contract to buy and sell yet, but let me ask you, what do you think the 5 factors in every contract are? Let's start with number 1 there, price. And these are things that you will affect with your buyer, and likewise countering with your seller. Okay? Price. Next.
Possession.
Possession is number 3. Yes. Terms. Okay. Are you going to be asking for a seller pay closing costs? Are you going to put up a good sizable earnest amount? Or are you willing to make that earnest money hard, non-refundable? Are they paying cash? Are they going with a loan? Is there a contingency on the loan? Are they shopping for a lower interest rate? They want the seller to buy down the points possibly, something like that. Maybe do a 3-2-1 buy downs and some of those things. Okay, so price, possession, terms, inclusions. If you're asking for a lot of inclusions that weren't offered in the MLS, or the seller's going to counter back with a lot of exclusions, you're going back and forth with a lot of things rather than presenting an offer that they can accept right off the bat. Inspections, conditions of the property, how much repair is going to be needed to close this property? How much is it going to cost the seller? If they're asking for a lot of things rather than taking the property as is and just saying, you know what, those aren't monumental things, the door doesn't lock, the light bulb missing, whatever. Those things are minor things. So try to not include some of the detail in your inspections and things like that. Warranty insurance, if it's available. Okay. This is discovery and planning. So you're going to plan your presentation as a buyer broker. Of course, you're going to sit down with the buyers. You're going to want to know what their wants and needs are. When you're talking with your buyers, make a list, if you haven't already done so. You probably should have done so long before this while you were showing them. What are the things they must have? Absolutely. Okay? Must have 4 bedrooms. 3 just won't work. 1 bathroom just won't work. So you're not even showing them those properties. But as far as the price, possession, they must move in by a certain date. Make a list of the things they must have, then go to the things that they want, but could be flexible to some sort of alternative. Or they want, but could give up. And then of course the last one is they don't want or need, but the other party doesn't know it. Okay, that's called a red herring. So basically what you do, if the seller is saying, okay, my brand new stainless steel refrigerator is excluded, that's right in the MLS. Well, you put in there as a buyer's agent, we have to have the refrigerator. Okay? Your buyers care less about the refrigerator. It's a negotiating point that you can back off at some future point in the negotiations when it really gets tough. Okay? So they come back with a counter and they say, we're not including the refrigerator, but we'll take your full price. Okay? All right, so you keep going back and forth. It's called a red herring. It's something that they can back off to if they need to. All right? After you establish these priorities, consider the value of the options to each party and which can be negotiated. Okay? You got to look at the sellers and say, okay, they're definitely really attached to that refrigerator, so we'll give in. We're going to initially ask for it just as a negotiating tool. Okay? And this is very important. Your presentation must show how you are meeting the needs of the other party. In other words, if the seller is offering X amount of dollars on the price, they're offering terms. They don't want you to take the refrigerator. And you draft it exactly the way that the seller is asking for an offer to come to them. What are the chances of you getting that offer accepted without accounting? Pretty good. Okay? So you're meeting the needs of your opponent. And I don't want to use that word as opponent, but that's what they are. They're your opponent. It's not an adversarial relationship. So you give them everything that they need that they're asking for in the MLS. Real good chance you're going to get your offer accepted with no counter. And then there's no other offers coming in the meantime. You're done. All right? Okay, so think of it this way. What is the benefit of the other party to accept your offer? For example, a low cash offer could have benefits of quick closing, no contingencies, no special conditions or required seller repairs, no financing terms.
Thank you.
In my career, I've been beat out by a lower price offer because price is not everything in an offer. I've been beat out by a lower price because we went in with 50% loan to value on our financing and we were going to close in a normal 30-day period. We were going to do an inspection, but it wasn't subject to any fixes. There was an as-is clause that we also put in there. So it was a pretty good offer. We offered $240,000 on a $200,000 listing. And we got beat out by a $180,000 cash deal that closed in 5 days. No contingencies. You cannot compete against that. Okay? So, my point as a buyer broker, figure out what the other side wants and give it to them. Because you know what? Sometimes the buyer winning that contract exceeds the expectations of them getting a lower price. In other words, they got the home. They're excited. They got the house. They get to move in. And price, I always tell buyers, is not the most important thing. You say you want to get a low price on the house, but let me ask you a question. This is a little far-fetched. If I could get you a home in Cherry Hills Estates, okay, for $2,000 a month, because I got whopping good terms for you, do you care what the price is? $2,000 a month in Cherry Hills. You really don't care what the price is. In there for $2,000 a month. All right. On a final note with that, back to my dad. When I was very young, he says, I'm going to tell you something. He said, when you're a buyer, think like a seller. And when you're a seller, think like a buyer. Everybody goes, what? And I tell buyers that, I tell sellers that. What? Okay, Mr. Seller, I want you to walk out in front of your home. I want you to look at it from across the street. And you tell me if you'd buy it for that price. And then as a buyer, when I'm showing a house, we walk into the house, Mr. Buyer, do you think you could sell this home tomorrow? Think like a seller. Yeah, you like it, it's unique to you, but do you think you could sell it to the general public tomorrow? Because if you can, that's the house you want, because it appeals to the masses. You don't want something just for your tastes. You'll actually have to sell it someday, so think about that. So as a buyer, think like a seller. As a seller, think like a buyer. It's good advice. All right. Some tips and hints. Learn to use the first names of all the opponents involved. Once you get under contract, stop referring to my buyer, my seller, that kind of thing. Kind of personalize it. It really breaks things down. There's less tension, and it just diffuses the whole situation. Another suggestion is when you challenge somebody, when you're having a conflict, attack the idea, do not attack them. Don't say to them, I think that's unprofessional. Just say, I understand your viewpoint, however, other people have seen it this way. That kind of thing. So don't attack the person, attack the idea. Break down the idea and propose your better idea. Once you attack people, it kind of sets things off in a bad way. To state this would be, if you consider that, I'm certain you will see the rationale in modifying your position. I like the last one here. This is called the old feel felt found. Have you ever heard of that? Other people have I know how you feel. Other people have felt the same way. However, those people have found that this, okay, puts them in the position of other people, and they feel like they're in community with the other people that are going through the same thing they are. Okay. If antagonized or offended from the other side, note the unprofessional demeanor and ask for an apology. Flat out. I mean, call them on the carpet. If they're really being rude to you, just say, you know, I think you're just being unprofessional. I think you should apologize to me, and I think you should apologize to my buyer. And if they don't, step away. Silence, I like that. Antagonism is a sign of weakness. When somebody is antagonizing you and you reply and you escalate it and you engage, what happens? It just starts rolling downhill, okay? Best thing you can do is be quiet, step away from the situation, and say, you know what? I think we need to think about this. Let me call you back. I have another phone call coming in. Let them simmer on the other side. Then when you call them back, readdress the issue. Do not address them. Address the issue only. Break down the issue and try to resolve it that way. People that accuse you of lying, they're lying themselves. So at that point, you may walk away from the discussion. This can diffuse their anger and then return to a more rational state of mind later. So call them back later. All right, I believe we're at the workbook. We're going to guide you through the process of just what we were talking about at the very beginning. You're going to put yourself in the place of being a listing agent, accepting the phone call from the buyer's agent, and then as the buyer agent, what are you going to do when you make that phone call to the listing agent, telling them you're bringing in an offer? Okay, there's some questions you need to ask. This is all posturing yourself, getting ready to present the offer. The more you know about the other side, the seller, the listing agent, the better off you'll be. So, Sam?
Thank you, sir. Okay. Before I dig in, just want to make sure everybody's got the sign-up sheet. If anybody hasn't signed in, please make sure and do that here real quick. Pass that back there. Make sure everyone's signed up for. All right, so we're talking presenting offers, negotiation and presenting, and definitely really good stuff here. Really fascinating stuff, some of the things that Randy's presented when we think about negotiation and some of the psychological factors that come into play. You know, I've heard quotes before, that he who cares the least wins. Things like that, which is a simple way to say that. What's tricky is when you have buyers and sellers and they are both trying to win, but both of them care. They can't act like they don't care. They don't have a stake in this situation when they certainly do. And it's very hard to play that game and to wait to see who blinks first. So fortunately, for the most part, our real estate business is one that has a certain amount of order to it. So in spite of everybody's quirks and differences and things like that, there's still going to be a lot of order in the sense of the sequence and the order of the way that it goes. And it helps kind of restore some sanity to it. And I think part of that, along with that, is that we want to help be a part of that. When we're negotiating, we have to be able to keep a cool head even if our client is misbehaving, if the other client is doing things that are at the very least problematic to your deal you're trying to put together, or worse, or the other agent could be really difficult or really awful to work with sometimes, and that could certainly happen. And so we want to take things like that when we run into them and help kind of bring them back together, bring it back into the fold here and get everybody on the same page, everybody wanting the same result. I generally find that a big part of successful negotiation is to keep your eye on the results. What result do you need? What kind of things can you do that will get you that result? What kind of things must you avoid doing because they will prevent your result? For instance, if you offend the other agent really, really bad, while he's sitting there trying to present your offer and everybody else's offer, that's not going to get you a very good result, right? Any changes here?
Yeah, that's fine. Sorry.
Okay. So I think that's just kind of a thing to always keep in mind is what result are we after, and what would he have to do to get to it? What's in our way? What are the obstacles that we need to clear out of the way? What could potentially jump out and be in the way later? And kind of take a look at that. So, let me just unplug it.
Well, I have the workbook.
Oh,
If you want it.
you guys all have a copy of the workbook also? Okay. All right, thank you. That's good. No, I get it. All right, so results obviously being the center point of the whole thing here. part of the result is that we need to get the property to the closing table the way that we were hired to get the property to the closing table. So we'll keep our eye on that. I do want to encourage you guys as well that when you have other people that are misbehaving, whether they're not calling you back as timely as they need to, or whether they are saying rude things to you, or worse, that kind of stuff or whatever, I want to encourage you guys to retain your own professionalism. I had a time early on in my career where I failed to do that. I had the other agent had done something really awful for my client and harmed my client, and that upset me. And of course, that just made everything worse. If I am going to be brokering a deal, it's not for me to be upset. I don't think it's appropriate for me to be easily upsettable, because then I'm not representing my client at the highest level that they could be represented at, because now I got my own junk in the way. Now I'm mad, somebody's hurt my feelings, somebody refused to call me back, that kind of stuff, and now I need some drama and stuff like that. Drama is an obstacle to your result, right? We want to get to the thing, to the closing table, so taking offense to stuff and all that just won't get you the result, and so don't take offense. It's all business stuff here at the end of the day, whether you're working, whoever the client is, whoever the other agent is, at the end of the day you go home, and that's a separate thing. It's your work, it's your career stuff, and so we want to treat it as such and not take things personally when people are rude and stuff. There's certainly an element of rudeness that occurs from time to time in this business, and I think part of it is just that this is tough negotiating stuff. This isn't happy, twinkly unicorns and rainbows and stuff all the time. This is stuff we have high stakes. Sometimes we have sellers in a very, very difficult situation in their life. Sometimes we have a buyer that's got everything at stake, and a moving truck and 12 people and all this, and they're counting on this thing here, and they've got some job, they've got to put their kids somewhere and all that kind of stuff. So the stakes are very, very high, and because of that, I think tempers can run pretty hot too. So we want to be the one alleviating that and not contributing to it. So let's dig into the workbook stuff here. Your objective as a listing agent is to motivate the buyer and buyer's agent to make the best offer possible. So when you're a listing agent, you've got a property on the market, you want offers to come in, and you want them to come in as strongly as possible. Hopefully they're the most attractive offers that we could come up with for the sellers. That's of course not always the case, and when we have a lovely seller's market, sometimes those offers come in and they very much are tailored to the seller, and it's wonderful when you're representing the seller and you're getting these offers in that are slam dunks. But when they're not, when they're way off on the price, or they're asking for all kinds of stuff, that can certainly, at the very least, it can disrupt everything. It can also upset your client and things like that. So we want to talk about a little bit what you can do to preemptively improve those offers when they come in when you're the listing agent. Well, let's see. We're going to promote and protect the seller's interests at all times. Don't give information that might weaken your negotiation position. Let me just touch on this right now. Do not give away things or say things to the other parties that will harm your negotiating position for your client. It happens a lot. And I have been known, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but I've been known to ask them questions that if they answer it, they're going to be giving me information they ought to not. There's some of it in here. I'm a listing agent, buyers brought me an offer, and I asked the buyer agent, well, okay, so I see your offer your buyers made this offer. Is that as high as they're willing to go? You guys see the problem right there? If he answers that, it's a problem. There's a few different ways you can deal with that. If you're the buyer agent and you put in an offer and the listing agent says, is that as high as your buyer is willing to go? The only things that you can tell them in that answer is what your buyer has authorized you to tell them. If the buyer has said, we're going to pay this a price right here, we're going to offer this price, but you can let them know we'll go up to such and such. You can even actually put that in the offer. It's called what we call an escalation clause. We're offers at $200, but we're willing to go $1,000 higher than the next best offer, up to $210 or something like that. So you can do an escalation clause, and that's certainly an escalation clause lets the seller know that the buyer has a tremendous urgency. If they're willing to not only come in with hopefully a strong price in that situation, but also that they're willing to come up just to beat anybody else, then that certainly tips the hand that the buyer really, really, really wants the property. Now, is that going to harm the buyer if the seller knows that? It might. It might if the buyer is trying to come in low and they're trying to negotiate low and all that. But what if the buyer is trying to get the property and they really, really, really want this property, and how much they pay for it is a secondary concern to the fact that they get it. because it's a seller's market and the market's really tight and they are having a hard time. They've bid on 7 different properties, they haven't got them all. Now on number 8, the listing agent's asking me if we'll come up. Yes. Right? So in that case, of course, like I say, you don't want to tell them things that you're not authorized to tell them because you don't want to harm your client's position. But depending on what's going on in the market and the circumstances of the deal, it may or may not be prudent to give the other agent information that they're asking for in that regard. So you want to think about the angles. That's a big part of what I want to kind of dig into here today, is to think about the angles, because where you're coming from, think about where the other agent is coming from. Hopefully you know where your client is coming from, the buyer or the seller, and then the other part of the buyer or the seller. What are their circumstances? What are going to be their concerns? What are their needs and things like that, so that you can speak to those things as you offer. You can address concerns and things like that and sweep them out of the way and give yourself the best chance to be victorious in your negotiating and get the deal done. First and foremost. So, okay. So there's some comments here. You want to be aware of these angles right here. Note these factors: buyers and sellers in neutral market. If it's a buyer's market and you have the seller, your seller's been sitting around the market for 6 months and he's not getting anything going on, and the buyer finally comes in with an offer, that's going to be a much different scenario than what we're seeing mostly today, which is the other side of it, where the sellers are in the driver's seat. Are the interest rates attractive or unattractive for buyers right now? That's certainly going to be a factor. Economic conditions and what's going on there. We certainly saw a big dip with the recession, 08 and 09. How much interest in this listing? And we're the listing agent. We've got a guy that's trying to bring in an offer on our property. How many showings have we had? What kind of feedback have we had? Because that's certainly going to be relevant to what kind of a strategy we want to approach with when we're looking at negotiations. If I'm the listing agent, I'm representing a seller. We've been sitting around 2 months, maybe 3 months, not a lot going on. Feedback's been a little shaky. Some people say it's kind of okay. Some people, maybe it's kind of overpriced, or maybe the feedback's just outright terrible. Terrible stuff is easy enough to understand. You got big problems. But some of the other stuff, the ambiguous stuff, where they say, I don't know, it was all right for us, or maybe it seemed a little bit small and things like that. One of the things to think about is most of the time when when you get feedback on a listing of yours and they say, well, it was a little bit too small, or different things like that, what they're ultimately saying in the end is that the price is too high. Because if the price was right, they'd have bought it regardless of whatever their objection is. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. Now, there are some buyers in some cases that need a specific thing. They need to be next to an elementary school, or they need to be next to a bus line, or things like that. And if it's not next to it, then the price is irrelevant. So it's not always the case, but a lot of times it is the case where that's what the feedback translates into. So when we talk to our sellers and we're negotiating and stuff like that, we want the seller to be aware of everything, good and bad, about the property. I think that's a big part of it here, is not just those factors externally, but also what's the seller's condition, what's the seller's time frame and things like that, and also to be able to tell the seller the truth. I think we need to tell our clients the truth. Now, if you have a buyer in today's market where it's a seller's market and stuff is really hot, we have to tell our buyers straight, don't we? We have to tell them, listen, it's very likely we're going to be competing with other offers. It's very likely they're going to get that price that they're priced at, because hopefully you've done your comps and you can see that they're priced in the realm, even though it might seem high to your average Joe Public or your client. It might, as the broker, what's going on, and you need to tell your buyer those things. Your buyer doesn't necessarily want to hear those things, because your buyer wants to hear about how you're going to get them a screaming deal, and we're going to steal a place, and we're going to get something half as much as everybody else pays for their properties and things like that. And of course, that's just not the reality of it. I think for the most part, people can appreciate you shooting straight with them and telling them the truth. Every now and then, it's a little bit more difficult than that. I think on the other end, we also have to tell our sellers the truth. We have to tell our sellers the truth about the how many showings have we had? Get down here. What kind of feedback have we had? Things like that. It also doesn't hurt when you have an offer come in on your listing and you're going to present it to, let's do another market analysis of the neighborhood here, which I believe is one of our pages here. If you have a listing and you just put it on the market yesterday and now you get a bunch of offers today, you don't really need to do a new market analysis to go over what's happened in the marketplace, because it's only been a day. But if some time has gone by, that even if it's just 2 weeks, 30 days, that kind of thing, or especially if it's more, it could be relevant to do because it could be that there are comps since then. When you made decisions on how to price it, it could be you've got some more sold comps since then, and that could be relevant because we know that the other party is looking at them too. We're sitting here trying to sell our house. The buyer's coming in trying to buy it. They're looking at the comps too. They're looking at the same things, same neighborhood and everything like that, and they've got the information. And that's something else that we want to make all other parties aware too. Listen, the other side of this, they have information. You know, if I've got buyers and we're trying to offer, Mr. Buyer, their sellers know that the market's hot. They're quite well aware. And Mr. Buyer, you know, the sellers know. And then on the other hand, Mr. Seller, the buyers know that, you know, there's 3 comps nearby that are sold at a certain price and they're all just like yours and you're sitting 10,000 higher than everybody else. The buyers know that. So that's going to be a factor in their strategy. So you can take that kind of stuff to incorporate that when you present so that they don't get offended. So they're not, you know, so we can say, listen, it's 10,000 low, don't worry about it, here's the information, where they're coming from and all that. And it can help them take some of the drama and emotional elements out of it and dig into, let's do a little bit of math. A couple of other things, let's see, I would just like to encourage you to have the buyer make an offer as close to the list price as possible. That way we'll have the best chance to put something together for both of our clients. Of course, as the listing agent, you always want to see in offers that are as high as possible. I think that kind of goes without saying, but certainly the buyer agent, sometimes I've seen it where the offer's so low, buyer agent will send it over and then send me a text or something like that. They don't really want to talk to me because they're embarrassed about how low the offer is. I heard an old real estate guru once say that if you're not embarrassed by how low your offer is, it's too high. Now, I think that's flawed. He was an investor. He was not just a regular homeowner, and that was kind of his way of looking at it. That is a problematic way to go into negotiations. Really, really, really low, or else he's just offering too much, and he just won't be able to live with himself because he's just paying too much for the place. That's not really the reality of the situation. Now, if you had the whole market sitting there stagnant, nothing selling anywhere, stuff like that, come on in with an embarrassing offer. There's no harm in that situation, right? But in a market that's a little stronger than that, people that want to send in embarrassing offers are people that don't have any houses. You know what I mean? Because they're not closing anything. It's generally not going to succeed. It's a poor strategy. So we do want to talk some strategy stuff here. Okay, a few other things. It doesn't hurt when we're talking to the buyer agent to find out what else we can tell the buyer and what else we can find out from the buyer. When I'm on the listing agent and buyers are coming in and stuff like that, I want to ask them some of the side questions. For instance, how much flexibility do they have on time frame? That can really matter when your people need to move. We're going to have contingencies and things like that. How much flexibility do we have on time frame? Generally, if the property is vacant, we're looking for the fastest closing possible. If it's sitting there empty, costing somebody money, we want it gone. But in another situation where it's not vacant, sellers are going to be there, they're going to have to move out, there's going to be some coordination involved and stuff, then that's a different matter. So, okay, our next page here, I don't really have a whole lot here to do with this, but it doesn't hurt to ask. If you're the listing agent and you have an offer in and you're having a conversation with the buyer agent, it doesn't hurt to ask them some of this stuff here. Their reason for buying, their needs and priorities, things like that. Have they made a lot of offers before, that kind of thing? Because that can inform me as a listing agent. If they've made offers on other properties before, that doesn't matter. What difference does it make to me, right? We're here, we're just negotiating this deal, but it certainly could matter if they've lost some properties before. If the buyer agent says, yeah, we've offered on 7 or 8 properties and we've got beat on them and all that kind of stuff, then I know, that informs me, that helps me when I'm going to go sit down with the sellers. I know that these buyers are tired of looking at houses. I know the buyer agent is tired of showing them houses. So that's going to be a factor now, because I know even if we counter them back higher than they might like, not only is the buyer more likely to take it because they're tired of searching and everything else, the buyer agent might even be more likely to encourage them to take it because the buyer agent's tired of showing them houses too. So that kind of information is valuable to me. We've heard certainly in the past the value of information and that general train of thought, and I think there's a ton to it, especially when it comes to negotiation and stuff. There's other clues that you can look for as a buyer agent. Things like, let's see, is the property vacant? How long has it been sitting there vacant? Is the yard all neglected and overgrown? Are there bills sitting around? I've seen times where I came in on a property. It wasn't vacant necessarily, but I could see that they had a bunch of letters sitting right at their front door, outside their front door from the city. Code violations, your weeds are too tall, and all this kind of stuff. So I can see that it's having some neglect and things like that. I want to know what all those situations are and some of those circumstances, because that may inform us on how to offer on something too. Is the property in foreclosure? You can find out if a property's in foreclosure right quick. You can call your title company. Hopefully it's North American Title, and Deb back here brought our lunch today. North American Title is a company that I've been using here for quite a while, and they really got some neat stuff. So, but you can check with them, and they'll help you research a property, and I think they have even an app for that, or the app that's rolling out soon, where you'll actually just be able to get right on there and check if a property's in foreclosure or not. And your buyer, if you're making an offer, they may want to know that kind of stuff. They're going to ask you some of those questions, like, well, what do you think we should do, or what do you think the seller's going to do right here and stuff. So, did you need to do something?
No, I was just going to help you with the pages here.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay.
Okay. Our next page here, our buyer's agent dialogue prior to writing an offer. This is a situation where you are the buyer agent, you're representing the buyer, you need to write an offer, but you need to talk to the listing agent first. And I really encourage you to do that. Now, if a property is listed on the market and you want to make an offer on it, you can write up that offer and send it over to the listing agent without having a conversation with them, certainly. Happens all the time, matter of fact, especially like, say, when the offer is real low and the buyer doesn't really necessarily, the buyer agent doesn't necessarily want to have that conversation. They want to have the shock wear off first. That's a problem right there, because when an agent submits a really low offer to the listing agent has to present that to the seller, don't they? They got to present their all offers, right? Listing agent does not want to present your super low offer to his client, because he has told his client what he could get for the property. And here we've got some offer that's much lower than that, contradicting it, making it look like potentially the listing agent maybe didn't know what he was talking about when he said he could get X amount of dollars for the property. So it's no fun presenting low offers when you're a listing agent. But there's some things, some ways that you can kind of soften the blow and make it a little bit more digestible. So here's some things, let's see. You're the buyer agent, you're calling the listing agent, and you can ask him things like, okay, I have a potential buyer for the property and I just need to check a few things. This is something that's a really good idea to do. Right off the top of my bat, I'm asking them what's their time frame. What is the seller's time frame if I know it's vacant? I actually have a vacant listing right now and a cash offering on it. They want to close right away. You think that'd be great, right? It's vacant, cash guy ready to close right away. Nope. Seller does not like it, because the seller has occupied it for a certain amount of time to avoid taxes and stuff like that, and cannot close until October 1st. So I'm sitting around with a cash guy ready to go, and we're all just going to sit around for a month anyhow, I guess. So those kind of things can certainly happen too. But okay, is the listing still available? What if the guys just signed it and put it under contract 10 minutes ago and they haven't changed it in MLS? Let's find that out. Matter of fact, that's a great reason to call first, isn't it? Is it even still there? Okay. Just to confirm, you're still asking X amount and the house has been on the market for X amount of days. If you call me and I'm the listing agent and you ask me how many days it's been on the market, I probably don't know. I mean, I can tell you how roughly, approximately, but I don't usually have that information off the top of my head. Next question, do you know the history of the previous listings? You can ask that with respect to the comps and things like that, or the history of the property, if it has been listed with other brokers before, if it's been through foreclosure recently, things of that nature. Especially if you see, like, let's say something, you pull it up, an address because you're going to offer on it, and you see that it was listed a year ago, and down at the listing a year ago they found that there was a bunch of comments about problems, physical problems that the thing had. Structural engineering report available, the last seller said. And then the thing went in foreclosure and never sold, and now it's being sold by the bank and you want to offer on it. Boy, that old listing sure would be interesting to find out some more about that, wouldn't it? And it's going to be a factor in negotiation. So you're the buyer agent, you're talking to the listing agent. Is this the original list price? You will typically know that. The Matrix MLS stuff has data where you can see that. Have you had much activity or interest at this level? That's I think a little bit more fair question. Mr. Listing Agent, have you had a lot of activity on this, or has it been quiet, or what's going on with that? Listing agent will tell you, yeah, we're getting tons of activity, but no offers right now, or it's been kind of steady or whatever. They will generally not tell you that, oh, it's been super slow and nobody's coming over. That would harm their seller, wouldn't it? So they will usually either dodge the question or, paper over it with some generic answer that will not harm the client, potentially. Okay, so is the seller looking for a particular closing date, and can they move out within a certain amount of days? So there's your time frame stuff. Are there any other current offers on the table? And have there been any other offers? I'm not so much worried about if there have been other offers in the past, but I do want to know if I'm going to be competing. If I'm making an offer on a property, whether or not I'm competing has everything to do with the strategy. If we're competing with other offers, we need to throw most of our strategy out the window and make the offer amazing, as good as we can if we want any help to get the property. If we're not competing, then we have way more room to ask for. Maybe you're going to ask for little stuff, that the seller's going to buy you a home warranty or whatever it is that you might want to do. It's a huge leverage factor, because if there's multiple offers on the table, even if the other offers are lousy, there's no way for you to know that, and then the seller is immediately, spontaneously, in a very strong bargaining position, and much stronger than they were the day before, without the offer. Same house, same price on the market, but now their leverage is completely different when they have multiple offers. Okay, in terms of personal property, the seller is including. Doesn't hurt to go over included, excluded. Is the seller including the swing set out back? Or is that workbench in the garage included? Different things like that. Or, Mr. Listing Agent, is there anything that's like excluded that I should mention in here or whatever? Especially if I know that there's going to be competing offers and I'm trying to tailor the offer to something that the seller will like, and this will be, well, our deal will be accepted more than any other. I'd really love to know about the things that, the seller's circumstances, so that I can tailor it right up front. Especially with respect to time frame, inclusions and exclusions. We don't have to ask how much they really want for the property. We have seen their list price. They'd like to have all that and more if they can, right? That's a slam dunk. Pretty much all feel that way. Okay, there's some other stuff here, like is a seller willing to pay for a home warranty, or is a seller willing to consider a carryback and things like that. You wouldn't want to necessarily ask those things unless they're rather important, because those things can sometimes muddy the water. For instance, if I'm competing, let's say I know that I'm going to, the inspection's going to go however it's going to go, but I know that we're going to be asking to have all the carpets cleaned. Just as a one simple little thing, I'm going to make the offer, but I know that we're going to be having all the carpets cleaned there because they're decent, but you see they're got some pet odor or whatever. You can put it right in your offer when you make the offer that the seller's going to have all the carpets professionally cleaned. No problem, you can do that. However, it may be that, especially if you're competing, that might be something that's less attractive to them. It might be more practical to leave that out of your offer initially and have that be something that comes up as part of your inspection objections. To that end, I want to mention real quick that your inspection is essentially a second negotiation. You've put the house on the market for this price, we've offered on it with this price, we've all agreed we're going to pay this amount of money, we're going to close on a certain date and everything else like that. That's all based on the house being fine. But oftentimes we go on our inspections and the house is not fine in one way or another. Sometimes we discover things that are substantially a problem, and they're going to affect the price a lot. Sometimes people will resolve these inspection issues by lowering the price. Sometimes they'll include a seller concession. Seller wasn't giving anything before, but now the seller is going to give $1,000 or a couple thousand or whatever to deal with a problem. A lot of times that's an easier way to do that, because it's harder, it's much more problematic to get handyman to come out to fix it. Hopefully they fix it good enough. What if he didn't fix it good enough and the buyer's going to come on their walkthrough the day of closing and say, well, I'm not satisfied with how well this is fixed. So a lot of problems there. So when you negotiate inspections, you will a lot of times be looking at dollar amounts, which is a lot more expedient in a lot of cases. But certainly in that context, you can get an idea that it is a second negotiation. So in that way, if I have elements like that, I may leave them for the inspection objection part of the process and leave it out of my initial offer, especially if I'm specifically trying to make my initial offer look as favorable as possible. Okay, this is a real good one here. Is there anything else in particular you think my buyer should know or consider? Anything we should know? We're going to offer on the thing, tell me anything you can tell me, things like that. I have had a lot of times, just by asking that question, I have had the other agent tell me all sorts of things freely that they should not be telling me. All kinds of things about, I've had a guy once tell me that the sellers know it's overpriced, but just go ahead and bring an offer and all this kind of stuff there. And he knows it's low, but they'll probably take it just fine, and all kinds of stuff. All kinds of stuff. It was a little while ago. I don't remember all the details of it, but I was like, yeah, okay, go on, because he's giving me information. Now, whether you represent the buyer or you represent the seller, it's, you need information to form your strategy. Who's the parties, what are they doing, what's everybody trying to do, so that'll help your logistics, and information like that can be really, really useful. If there is information like that available to you, I think it's prudent to get it. I think it's reasonable to ask questions of the other agent, and if they're going to harm their client, then I don't suppose we can help that a whole lot, except that we can certainly help our own clients at the very least. For the most part, I'll tell you, I haven't run into a whole lot of that lately. A lot of agents are very tight-lipped. They're very close to the vest. They'll ask all these questions or whatever, and listing agent won't say much more than send over the offer. And I've had that too. I've had people ask me all kinds of stuff. Is the seller willing to do this? Is the seller willing to tell? Is the seller do that? How? I can't tell you that. And they know I can't tell them that, but it doesn't stop them from asking anyway. And generally what I come back to, and this is something that you can utilize too, is that I'll be happy to present all offers. Go ahead and send the offer over. I'll be happy to present it. I'll be happy to present that offer. Well, yeah, but will the seller will do this? I'll be happy to present that offer. Send that offer right over and I'll present it. Once they've sent the offer over, it opens up the conversation. It opens up the conversation with my client, and then that opens up the conversation with the other agent, and I can start to talk as the client directs me. So I want to encourage you guys, if you're ever getting in that place where somebody is asking you questions inappropriately, things that you can't answer, or it becomes awkward like that, I want to encourage you just to defer back to default situation. Like, I can't really answer that, but I'd love to present that offer. Go ahead and send that offer over and I'll present it. And sometimes you have to do that a few times before they get the hint that they're hitting a brick wall and they're not going to get the inside scoop. Yes, sir.
I just had a question. If you receive multiple offers as a listing agent, and they're relatively similar, say they're all financing, they're all within a few $1,000s, what's the most efficient way, if you've not covered this already because I came late, to get back with them? I've heard things like, call everybody back, the seller's going to make up his mind at 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock.
Yeah, good
submit
question.
your highest and best.
Good question. I'll dig into that here, and I know I've got a little bit of stuff here, but negotiation's kind of dodgy, so we may be all over the place a little bit, but to answer that, typically the protocol that I see go on that seems to be the most appropriate and common is a call for highest and best. That is that there's going to be more than one offer on the table when you present. Once the moment that I know that that's going to be the case, I'm going to contact everybody who's got an offer on the table and let them know that it's a multiple offer situation now, and they have till such and such time to present their highest and best. So it might be, oh well, it's Saturday afternoon, I've already got 3 offers in on it or whatever, so I'm going to present Sunday night. I'm going to hit up everybody, the 3 people that offered, and let them know I'm presenting Sunday night. And anybody else that offers too, I'm presenting Sunday night, and I want to give everybody a chance to do their highest and best. Now, if the offer that they wrote is their highest and best offer, that's as much as they're going to do or whatever, they're going to sit tight, fine, no problem, great, that's your highest and best. If they say, well, we're competing, let's go back here, and that changes the strategy now, doesn't it? So we're competing, maybe we do want to offer a little bit more, or take out something that we asked for, things like that. So it makes sense to do, because if you're representing the seller and you call for highest and best, who wins? Your seller. You know what I mean? Your seller is going to benefit by creating what's essentially going to formulate into a bidding war. I do want to say that in spite of that, you want to set a short time frame for when you're going to present, and you want to keep everything on the up and up and shoot straight with everybody on that. Sometimes you'll get very hurt feelings from agents who are frustrated, they can't find anything for their client, they've made this offer on the property, you didn't even tell them they were competing or anything, and then they get blown out. Or you tell them, well, listen, I'm going to present by tomorrow, Sunday night at 7 o'clock, and so get your highest and best in there, and then Monday rolls around, and you're nowhere to be found, they can't get a hold of you, stuff like that. It's discourteous, right?
Right.
So as real estate professionals, I think it behooves us to be courteous, and to that end, when we have competing offers, let's be as courteous as possible. I know if I'm making an offer on a property and suddenly it's a competing situation, I appreciate knowing. At least then I can tell my buyer. You know what I mean? If my buyer, if we make an offer on a property and we don't, as far as we know, we're not competing, and then somebody else comes in and grabs it, and I got to call my buyer back and say, oh, somebody else offered and got it, we didn't get it. Buyer's going to be like, well, we didn't even know. We didn't know if there was other offers and things like that, right? So to that end, when you want to think about that, even when you're creating your offering strategy with a buyer, Mr. Buyer, in spite of the fact that the listing agent told me there's no other offers, in spite of the fact that the property's been sitting around for a little while and everything else, it could be still that we're going to have a multiple offer situation. It could also be that if there are going to be multiple offers and we don't get an opportunity for highest and best. They just take them as they are and just counter the one they like best. They don't, they don't have to give everybody a chance to get in the game. You'd think that they would, because it'd be their interest to get everybody's prices up, what they're offering, but sometimes they'll just run them out. So when we do that kind of courtesy there, I think it extends the courtesy to the public, our buyers and sellers, so that they understand that.
One last question.
Yes, sir.
If it's a bidding war, and if a buyer comes in and offers a price higher than you believe it will appraise for, let's say, is there any way to accept that offer and counter back that the buyer shall pay the funds to sell
That is
over and above the appraised price?
Yeah, that is a sticky wicket, and appraisal has everything to do with negotiations, most definitely. For instance, I had a gal, I got this listing, and I had an offer come in here recently, but the financing was VA and FHA VA. They've got a little tougher requirements on their appraisal, and the offer was quite high, but we're actually concerned about appraisal stuff, and my seller wants to wait for a conventional buyer or a cash buyer so that we don't have an appraisal problem that's going to blow us out. Because it's most definitely a factor. One of the things is, if we're bidding past where I think we can appraise and people are bidding and stuff like that, one of the real factors that's going to come into play, if not right up front, is who's got the cash to make up the difference if the appraisal is short. I've got 3 buyers and we're all offering a house for $300, and everybody's putting some money down, but I'm not sure if I can hit $300. I mean, I've got a comps to $285, maybe $290 extra cash. You know what I mean? And I would even potentially call, in that situation, I would call the buyer agents, everybody, and just let them know I've got a multiple offer thing. We're in the realm where appraisal can certainly be a question mark. So what I want to know is who's got potentially extra money to work with, because that's who's probably going to get the counter proposal first. You know what I mean? Or who we're going to deal with first. And that person we're potentially going to counter, if it's not, because it's probably not already in the contract, but we're going to counter back for the guy. All right, we're going to take this guy, and this is the price and everything like that. But right here in the counter proposal, the buyer agrees that if it doesn't appraise, he's going to make up the difference in cash. So if the appraisal comes in low, say $290, and everybody's agreed to $300, buyer's going to pay the extra $10 grand in cash. That's happened this year. It's not a problem. It's perfectly legit and everything like that. A lot of times buyers don't like to do it. Buyers don't want to pay the extra $10,000 in cash because, my gosh, the appraiser says it's only worth $290, right? Why would I want to pay an extra $10,000 more than what it's worth, right? Except that what it's worth is an arbitrary thing. What it's worth is whatever the market will pay for it right now, really, isn't it? If there's cash buyers out there all day that'll pay $300 for it, that's what it's worth, not the $290. The appraiser's got his guidelines and regulations of how he's going to get to that number, but that's not all there is to it. It's never quite that simple. So with respect to appraisal, I will also tell you that if your buyers are coming in and they are FHA or VA, that can create more of a concern for appraisal stuff right there. And that's another good reason that you want to be looking at comps. Whether you're the listing agent or the buyer agent, when it's time to make an offer on a property or go under contract, we need to be looking at comps because we need to see, are we going to appraise? That's going to matter, because if we're not going to, or we're worried about it, we need to have those conversations with our clients right up front. And Mr. Buyer, if we don't appraise here, we're either going to have to get the seller to come down to what we did appraise for, or you're going to have to pay the difference, or we're going to have a dead deal. Now, a dead deal is not the worst thing ever. If it doesn't appraise, then the seller won't come down, the buyer won't pay extra, then everybody just walks off, and no harm there. Except at that point, the buyer has probably paid for a $400 appraisal, and probably a $200-something inspection, and things like that. So with those kind of things in play, we still want to pay attention there. Even though $600 is not the same as $600,000, it's still, we don't want to be spending those frivolously or carelessly if we can avoid it. Okay. Listing agent's dialogue with the buyer's agent before meeting with the seller. So this one starts off, I received your offer and just want to clarify a few things so I can present. What can you tell me about your buyers? What are their reasons for buying, motivations, offer history? If I'm the listing agent and offers are coming in like that, I love to ask that question, what can you tell me about your buyers? The buyer agent is a lot of times lobbying for their client. they're gonna paint a good picture. They're gonna tell you about that buyer, and they're gonna tell you hopefully a bunch of good stuff about that buyer. A lot of times they'll tell you a lot of details, looking even for different angles like, well, my buyer is a nurse and a school teacher and a police officer and whatever else, you know, and so us in the community, we all like that, and so maybe they're trying to give themselves an edge. Maybe the seller of the property is a police officer too, so they're partial to that kind of stuff. Agents will a lot of times attempt to do that kind of stuff, but sometimes those things can inform you of some different stuff there. I mean, if they're telling you about some occupation or something like that that they're in that's real good, that's great. If it's some other kind of occupation that is not so stable or whatever, then maybe you want to be aware of that too, so you can counsel your seller. Like, for instance, Mr. Seller, I talked to the buyer agent on this offer that came in, and he was telling me that their buyer has been working self-employed for over 2 years and everything as an exotic dancer. Well, they may have more mortgage trouble than your nurse and your policeman, because sometimes the documentation is more problematic, things like that. So definitely a relevant question. The buyer's initial offer is X amount of dollars. Is that as high as they will go? Here's another interesting thing. If the buyer agent starts telling you things they ought to not tell you in that situation, that raises an eyebrow a little bit about the buyer agent, doesn't it? Maybe a little bit like maybe this buyer agent hasn't been around all that long. If they're having some competency issues and they're doing things they probably ought to not be doing right there in the first phone call before we've even presented, what other competency issues might they have? Maybe they're not very good at getting inspections figured out and worked out, and we're more likely to have our deal fall on inspection because this agent doesn't know what they're doing right there. Things like that. And I will tell you right here, I pay real close attention to contracts when they come in, because if I've got multiple offers and one of them's sloppy, that's the first one cut. Because the competency of the agent matters. Yes, I could probably sign that deal, or I could fix it. I could certainly write up a counter proposal and with the price we want and all this stuff, and then I could also put in all the corrections for that sloppy, deficient offer and everything. But that's a factor. You know what I mean? If the three offers are, you know, roughly the same in general or stuff like that, but I see sloppiness, I'm concerned about it. I really am. I also, when I'm looking as a listing agent, I'm looking to see who's got a complete package put together. I not only want to see the offer, but you know I want to see like a copy of the earnest money check perhaps, maybe a lender letter, definitely a lender letter. How can I counsel my sellers whether or not we should even take this offer or even negotiate on this offer if I don't have a lender letter, for goodness sakes? So think about that with respect to your negotiations. When you're coming in as the buyer agent, how can you come in as the buyer agent as complete as possible? How can you present yourself and your paperwork and your client and everything to the other side in the most complete, stable, attractive way possible, including yourself? Because that's what comes to the heart of it, right? And I think that will, by taking that into consideration, it will matter a lot for you. And you would do something similar when you want to go list a property. For instance, when you go on the listing appointment, how can you be as complete as possible so that they'll make the decision that you want? Okay. Closing and possession dates are. Is there any particular reason for this, or these days, or any flexibility? If I'm the listing agent and I got offers in, I definitely want to know about the buyer's time frame, because we got a time frame too, and that's a factor. And then so forth. The one right above it, buyer's putting down X amount and we'll finance X amount. Is that correct? That might seem redundant, but it doesn't hurt to do, because that opens up a conversation there about the financing. Sometimes they might tell you, well, yeah, we're going to put down 10%, but we've actually got like 20% or whatever, but they really want to keep some liquid cash for repairs afterwards. Great, I like that, buyer. You know, we've got reserves, we've got extra money, right? Okay, especially if we need extra money because a 10% down loan turns out it's not going to work out and only 20% down will do. Great, because they have it. That kind of stuff. I want to hear about those things from them, and also if they're anything else to do with their finance and their terms, and specifically cash to close. Lenders, when they're qualifying people for loans, they look for reserves. It's typically 2 months or more. Like, they want to see that you have at least 2 months worth of house payments as a reserve sitting in your bank account or whatever. And a lender likes that. They feel better about making the loan or whatever. And the same thing, I feel better about going under contract with a buyer that's got reserve cash. Okay. additional personal property. Doesn't hurt to, especially if they're asking for things that are not included. Like we put in the MLS, the refrigerator is excluded. They have come in on the offer and asked for the fridge, like Randy mentioned. You might want to ask them, is that fridge going to be a big deal, or is that going to be a sticking point, or what's going on there? Now, if you don't want to, you don't have to ask them anything at all, and you can go and present it to the seller, make sure the seller knows, in this offer, Mr. Seller, they have asked for your refrigerator. Let's take that into account, because we've got X minus Y equals Z on the dollars, but we've got these other things, like the timing and things like that, and also inclusions and exclusions in the refrigerator. What's a $3,000 refrigerator? And that's going to be a factor. That's going to come into play on the map, on the numbers and everything. So we want to make sure that they're aware of that, and then sometimes, too, by asking that, you can sniff out the red herrings, and when they say, oh, you know, how big of a deal is that refrigerator? And they might say, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal. You know, you know, they don't really have a fridge, but you know, if that's going to be a deal killer or whatever, sometimes that will really help me. On the other hand, sometimes they'll say something like, you know, my client is a single mom or something, and they got some kids, and it'd be just a big help. If the sellers don't want to leave the fridge, that's okay, but it'd be a big help to my client because of whatever like that, tug on a few heartstrings or whatever. That'd help. If I'm representing the buyer and they really do want to get that fridge, I might have that conversation with them. I'm not going to tell them anything that's not true, but I might tug on a few heartstrings or go to the personal element in order to reach out to the seller, because I want the listing agent to communicate that stuff to the seller, because it's going to be a factor in the decision making, especially if it's a few $100, maybe it's not a big deal, you know, either way. Maybe the seller say, hey, just go ahead and leave it there, you know, we'll help the person out. Now I don't have to move it anyway, right? So now they're going to leave the fridge in the deal. I just got my client the fridge. That's a good thing. It might be a little thing, but for some people it's not a little thing at all, and it can matter. And you can use the same kind of stuff there for just about anything else. I will also tell you, like on the other side, we were saying that on the listing side, when people come in trying to ask for a lot of appliances, depending on the situation, I've counseled my sellers a lot to exclude those. They want their refrigerator, washer, dryer? No, no, and no. Because I know the buyers will still take the deal and stay in the deal, right? Even if the seller, maybe they don't care about the appliances that much one way or another. Maybe it's just not that big of a deal. But then the buyer comes a week or two later and they say, well, we've got this inspection and we've got this and we got that and we've got this other thing that we need fixed, or, you know, we need to deal with or whatever. And then the seller can say, well, you know, we don't really want to do these things. But how about if we throw those appliances in? And then you can do them yourself, right? Now the seller has the seller didn't care about the appliances anyway. Now they just got out of the inspection stuff and don't have to do anything. So that is a nice trick for negotiating the inspection stuff. Okay, this is good stuff to ask for. The buyer inspection period, let's pay attention to that. If I'm the listing agent and I'm talking to the buyer's agent about the offer they just sent me, if their inspection period is more than 10 days, I want to know why that is. How long does it take for an inspection, right? Yeah, maybe a couple of days to get it set up or something, but we need that done right away because it's a huge escape hatch. They don't even have to have any reason at all. They don't even have to have an inspection. They can just punch the thing and they're out. So I need a short date right there. That's a factor in negotiation, isn't it?
Oh, sure.
Betcha, you betcha, you betcha. And also, sometimes they'll even put in the offer, this house is as is, buyer waives their right to inspection, whatever, this and that. They're not going to be some reason, because otherwise I'm going to tighten it up, and I might tighten it up on them anyway. Because sometimes we have to be ruthless about that stuff there. We want to accommodate people and take care of people, and we have to accommodate the buyers and sellers, all the parties, in order to get the broker the deal and bring it on home. But sometimes it's not prudent, you know, to the person you represent to accommodate the other person beyond a certain point. Okay, loan stuff, man. This is super, super important. If you are the listing agent and you have an offer in on your stuff, let's. I don't just want the lender letter. I do want the lender letter, but I'd also like to just have a conversation about it. Mr. Buyer Agent, what's going on with your buyer's loan? How far along is he in the process? Has he done loan application? Because you know it's possible for a borrower or prospect to talk to any kind of lender for 5 minutes. La la la. I make this amount. Here's my social, whatever. Boom. Here's your pre-qual letter, and they'll go shopping with it. They have done nothing. Right? We have no paperwork, we have no pay stubs, we have no bank statements, tax returns, things like that. And of course, a lot of times when we go pull the whole 3-bureau credit report and we go pull in all of the other documentation, lo and behold, the numbers don't line up with what the buyer said initially. And now the buyer who looked like they could get a loan, the lender said they could do the buyer's loan, can't because the paperwork doesn't line up, right? There's a reason for the old term, buyers are liars. There's a reason for that. So, So we want to be aware of that, and I want to find out when I'm talking to the buyer agent, especially if I've got multiple offers. Have they, how far along are they in the paperwork process? Have they done the full loan application? Have they talked to the lender about, as far as the, have they provided documentation, pay stubs, tax returns, bank statements, whatever else they need, the rent where they rent right now and things like that. That can even be a factor because sometimes when they are trying to get a loan, if they are living in dad's basement not paying any rent, but now their house payment's going to be $1,500 a month, even if they qualify for it, they totally qualify for it. It's what the lenders call payment shock. That's a huge jump in their monthly, and it freaks them out. They're afraid that the buyer won't be able to handle it. And it's a factor in their decision-making with the lender. So therefore, I want to know about it, because if there's going to be a payment shock kind of thing, then that could kill the loan, which would cause me a problem trying to get my sellers to the closing table on it. So let's find out about that stuff. Really want to encourage you to be knowledgeable about financing and how it works, and then be knowledgeable about it so that you can, not only so that you can ask these questions intelligently and satisfy them so that you can counsel your seller well, but also what if you're the buyer agent and the listing's putting the screws to you and grilling you, asking you all these questions? Know the answers, right? And all you have to do to know the answers is ask questions. Ask the lender, ask the buyer, and you can also tell the buyer right there if the buyer is, they want to go and start looking at properties and offering on properties and things like that, and because they took 5 minutes on the phone with the lender, you can let them know, listen, I'm thrilled to show you properties, and I'm so glad you talked to the lender and all that kind of stuff there, but you need to go meet with them and bring your stuff before we go make offers. Because this is going to happen to me. You know what I mean? I'm going to get grilled by these people and they're going to ask me all about it there, and I'm going to have to tell them we really haven't provided any documentation of any kind, and really, we don't really have any idea if we can really get this loan or not. Listing agents, especially when there's competing offer situations, are looking at these more carefully. Most of the time they will call the loan officer and ask them the same questions they have asked you to verify and see how it smells. How does it line up? Is anybody lying? That kind of stuff can be a factor, so you want to be squared away. Remember I said, how can I present my situation and my buyer situation to the other side as favorably as possible? And part of that is to have these answers in your pocket. What is the buyer doing financially? Okay. Preparing to present. This is good stuff here. Update your comparable market analysis. Let's have a look at sold prices and things like that. For instance, this condo I just listed, we had a couple of units just like it right there in the complex, under contract at $69,900, and they're not closed, and they're not closed, and they're not closed. Well, I got an offer coming, actually I have an offer in this morning, and hopefully another one here later, and so should have some nice offers and stuff like that. Before I go present those tonight, I'm going to go get in the MLS today and go and check those two that were sitting there at $69,900 under contract on Friday, hopefully end of month, and hopefully somebody has closed something there and input the data so I can see what those closed for, because that's going to have everything to do with appraisal, right? And that's going to have a lot to do with how I counsel my seller. Mrs. Seller, I know you want X amount of stuff for your house, but here's your comps right here, and they're not there. They're just not there. So, and you can even sometimes use those to help negotiate. For instance, if the seller's really high, you know they're really high, but that's where they want to start out. Somebody comes in lower on it and stuff like that, and the buyer that's coming in a little lower, maybe they're right. Maybe you know you're high. They're coming in. They might even send the comps along with it. Sometimes I'll have the agent send me comps along with an offer to support their number. I will tell you what, as a listing agent, when I get a low offer come in, I may ask the buyer agent to send me some comps along with that offer. So that, do you have some comps to support your position? Do you mind sending me over some comps to support your position? So then that way, when they do that, when I present to the guy, I can be like, well, here's why, Mr. Seller, here's why they offered where they did. They're looking at this comp right here and that comp right there, and they're saying these comparable properties that just sold have this or that factor, and so therefore, here's where we are. And of course, a lot of times sellers will say, well, my house has some magical stuff, and I used gold paint, and so it's all lined with gold now, and so I need more. So whatever it is, you can certainly run into those things there, but those comps can sometimes help because sometimes not only do we want the other party to move up, maybe you represent the seller and we're going to want the buyer to come up higher on their price, but sometimes in order to broker the deal and to get the seller to the closing table like he hired you to do, the seller needs to come down too. And sometimes the seller needs to get out of their own way, and make price reductions that they didn't want to, but they have to because the market requires it. You know what I mean? The market will speak. And when the market has spoken, that's kind of where things are at. It doesn't matter how you feel about it. It doesn't matter how much money you needed for it. It doesn't matter how much you paid for it once upon a time. None of that stuff matters, Mr. Seller, right? So when you're able to deliver some of that in a tactful manner, then that can help your negotiations when you're presenting, because sometimes it's not just the other parties that need to negotiate, it's your guy too. And then if that's the case there, let's look at all the angles. Where's the buyer coming from? Where's the seller coming from? Where does the information line up? Who's desperate? Who's got more urgency or need than the other party? Things like that. All right, examine buyer qualifications. We've talked about that. We don't want to take the home off the market without some assurance that the buyer can perform. The third one here, choose a venue. This is interesting. Select a time when all parties who need to prove the offer can be present and a place with minimal distractions. If you have to go to their house to present and there's dogs and kids and phones ringing and stuff like that, that's going to be really a difficult time to present somebody's offer, especially because these are major legal documents, 16 pages long. Might even be the time to have them come into your office. How many people here know that it's really hard to get clients to come into your office? You may not know a whole lot because a lot of you guys are new. It's really hard, man. It's really hard to get them to come into your office. They're all dinking around, and you know a lot of the other agents don't make them come into the office either. But once you've already listed them, they're working with you, you've communicated with them, the house is on the market, you're the guy, you're the agent, and then offers come in, you need to present them, they'll come into your offer to come in and have a look at them. They'll come into your office for that. So that might be one way to go with it. One thing that I want to talk to you about as well is that we have, of course, e-contracts now, and a lot of times we're doing everything by email now, click, and it's great, love it. Except that it is possible in that scenario to present offers to a seller without actually sitting down with your seller, right? Presenting them remotely. It's a little bit dicey, I must say. One of the problems that I have run into when I'm presenting offers is that it's nice to have kind of a spreadsheet. You might have, here's offer number 1, and here's this, that, and the other elements about it. And right here in the middle, here's offer number 2, here's this, that, and the other. Price, possession, terms, things of that nature, inclusions, exclusions. These guys want the fridge, these guys don't. You know what I mean? To have kind of a spreadsheet of your different offers and the different factors, so that when you present to it, you guys can come to a decision more comprehensively, so that everybody's going in with their eyes wide open instead of the seller being like, well, I don't know, what do you think? A lot of times when you present offers to sellers and you're not there and they're just looking at a couple emails you sent over, they really don't know what they're looking at, and you may not actually be serving them very well. They really just don't know what they're looking at, and so they'll kind of look at it and they'll kind of glaze over and stuff like that, and then they'll just kind of, well, I don't know, what do you think? I don't know, what do you think? Because they really haven't looked at the stuff, because you haven't sat down to prepare it for them in front of their face where they can look at it. Matter of fact, what if they want to have the night to go over it, or to think about it, sleep on it, things like that? Wouldn't it be great to go meet with them and bring it on paper where you can leave a copy with them, they can look at it, fall asleep with it, things like that? Not a bad way to go, and I will tell you the other reason for why I think it is a good idea to do as much as you can is the net sheet. And we talked about the net sheet here. North American Title has a really neat net sheet right on their website, so you can definitely check out Debbie's stuff there on that, and they can work up a net sheet for you. You guys should generally have mentors, and your mentors will help you work on net sheets as well. A net sheet is math that you work out for the seller on what the seller's bottom line is. Here's your purchase price, here's your cost, your commission, your title, your FedEx, your whatever kind of fees or whatever, your mortgage payoffs, and here's your bottom line. Here's how much money you can expect to get at closing, or expect to have to bring to closing if they're upside down, right? This net sheet is really, really important, because it can have everything to do with the seller's looking at, well, I don't know which one. It's all about seller's bottom line in a lot of cases. Of course, they have other factors, like is this buyer legit or not? And is it going to close in September or October or November? That matters, different things like that matter. But sometimes when it comes down to the dollars, they need to be able to see it. And so it may be able to help you not only have a spreadsheet of the different offers and how they kind of break out, but also the net sheet. Hey, Mr. Seller, if we go with this one, this is your bottom line. If we go with this one, this is your bottom line. And of course, if you're leaning towards one, hey, I think this guy seems to be the strongest. He's got by far the most money down. So maybe we can counter him, because he's got a lot of good, strong elements. If you're looking, if they've got 5 or 6 different elements, and each one you got them on a spreadsheet, you can easily see which one's got the best elements, and which guy you ought to be working with first. Even if he doesn't have them all, because you still want to counter the guy back on price, he might still be the strongest of the 3, things like that. So that the net sheet can really be a big factor in it. I'll tell you, the other day, I was presenting an offer, and the offer was $82,000, and then they wanted the seller to give a $1,000 concession back to the buyer, pay for buyer's closing costs. Super normal, happens all the time, easy. 82 minus 1, right? My seller couldn't get that. My seller, and I tried to explain it this way, and I tried to explain it that way. There's not a whole lot of ways I could explain 82 minus 1, but I really tried. And she actually had to get another person on the line on a 3-way call, so I could kind of explain the whole thing to an extra person. It was just really simple stuff, but sometimes you're going to have somebody that has that for whatever reason. In this case, there was a little bit of a language barrier. Her English was real good, but maybe it wasn't as good as it appeared to be, or something like that. So different things like that that come into play that net sheet can really help, so that you can just, here's the bottom line. And then too, when you recommend, Mr. Seller, here's the strategy that I recommend. We've looked at the offers, we've seen the pros and cons, things like that. And so here's the guy I think we should work with first, and here's what I think we should do. That kind of stuff. You want to be able to, it really helps to be able to present that to them in person as well. And you can even say, here's what I think we should do, and here's why, right? Because, he's got these elements, so we don't have to worry about this, we just need to tweak this and that, and this is our guy. Yeah, so being present with them, being able to hammer out math with your seller or stuff like that will help you come to and make decisions and things like that. And fear not, because even though you may not be able to do all that at the moment, your mentor can certainly do that with you. Your mentor will go on listing appointments with you if you need. They'll help you work out net sheets, and really you can do training on net sheets ahead of time and be real well versed. You can fill one out, a net sheet really accurately without ever having a closing before. Just a little bit of training. So we have net sheets here. We've got a net sheet on our dashboard, things like that. I've got some blank ones, and Deb, they've got a really neat software for that on their website, so check that too. All right, here's some interesting stuff here. Let's see how much time we have. A little bit. Keep the sellers focused when counteroffering. Don't be too quick to give a counteroffer before sufficiently going over the initial offer first. Man, oh man, watch out. As a broker, when you're writing an offer, you're going to make an offer on a property, take an extra minute. I would even encourage you, before you write the offer, you know what you're doing, you know what house you're going to write on, because you just showed it. They're liking it and all this kind of stuff. Make notes. Notes. So that when it's time to write the offer, you can go back and jar your memory. Oh yeah, we forgot to mention the swing set. Oh my gosh, don't forget your closing cost money, stuff like that. I had a deal very early on in my career where I helped my clients offer on $125,000 on a property and forgot to put the $3,000 in there for the sellers to give back to my clients for seller concessions. What happened? I had a rotten day. What happened, I essentially said, well, I'll have to write a check. And it would have just eaten up the entire commission, but I'll write a check, because that's what you do in this business a lot of times. When you make mistakes like that, you get your checkbook out. And you're going to have to solve it when you make mistakes. If you do not want to pull your checkbook out and blow all of the money you just earned right back out the door, avoid those kind of mistakes. So when you have, I saw this happen here recently, a couple different things. One, the sellers needed a bottom line of $217,500. They were just squeaking out, just barely squeaking out. They had to get $217,500 for the place. And if the buyer wanted any closing cost money back or whatever, they needed to push up the price higher to cover it. So after all this negotiation, the agent, they put in the price of $217,500, but they forgot to take out the concessions. And so now the sellers are supposed to bring $3,000 to closing, because in the counter proposal, the agent put in the $217,500 and they forgot to remove the $3,000 that the seller's given back to the buyer. Now, is that listing agent going to get hurt on their commission?
Yeah.
Probably by about $3,000 bucks. You know what I mean? We also had one here recently where an agent countered one of our agents. One of our agents put in an offer. The other agent counters back. She meant to have that counter proposal say $320, but the counter proposal she sent back with seller signatures was $230. $90,000 less. The buyer signed it. Buyer signed it. And the listing agent instantly had the worst day she's had in this business. Guarantee you. Because, well, I don't know, I'm not sure, it's very recent, but most likely what will happen is for E&O insurance, if the buyers hold their feet to the fire and the buyers push, I mean, how hard would you push on a deal like that for an extra 90 grand, right? If the buyers do that, then her E&O insurance will probably have to write a check for that. And then I'm not sure what would happen with the broker after that. I mean, she still should be able to get E&O insurance. There's nothing disastrous has happened and all that, unless there's follow-up stuff like complaints to the real estate commission and all that, where she would get other additional discipline for that kind of stuff. We don't have to do all that, guys. Let's just take an extra time. Okay? And when you're presenting offer, let's say you're a listing agent and you've got an offer in, whether it's one offer or two or three or 10 or whatever, notes on each offer, as much as you can. Put them in the margins, put them wherever you have to. Keep them squared away as you can, so that, for instance, let's say you've presented the offer or offers, and you've decided which one or whatever, and you're going to go back to your office and you're going to write that counter proposal. Hopefully, when you write your counter proposal, you will not forget something important that you're supposed to put in your counter because you took notes. Okay? All right, so let's go into this stuff here. Keep the sellers focused when you're counter offering. In writing your counter, you may want to emphasize the areas that you do agree on before you begin asking for modifications. That can be a difficult thing too, because you and your seller have gotten together and put the house on the market in a certain way. Now the buyers come in with something less than what y'all planned on, and still you've got to get the seller to agree on it. And so it's essentially can sound something like, well, yeah, I know I told you last week that we should get 200 for the place, but now I'm telling you we should only get 190, and for no reason, basically. Unfortunately, if you can't back that up anywhere, then it could sound like, well, you don't really know what you're doing very well if that's going on. So it's important to be careful in how you're presenting the stuff here. Like I said, keep the sellers focused. Emphasize on the things that you do agree on. Good news, Mr. Seller, we've got an offer. We agree on the fact that this house needs to get to the closing table. Everybody agrees on that. So we've got somewhere to start with right there. And don't let disagreement over a minor point take away focus from a well-priced offer. If everything's good in general, but they really want that workbench in the garage, and my guy really wants to take that workbench, let's not fight over the workbench. Let's at least put that on the shelf and work on the rest of the deal and everything and try and get that sorted out. It's really important that we are as good with that as we can, so that we don't have little things trip us up on our deals. And I'll tell you guys, this stuff here there's as much as I can give you this input, and I'm going to give you some more stuff here as we wrap up, as far as some other resources to get into. This can be make or break for you guys. This can be where your deals live or die, succeed or fail. When the negotiations come in and stuff like that, I will tell you, I had a time, I listed this guy, it was around $250. It was all right, it was a little bit higher, whatever, and I got an offer, and it wasn't bad. It wasn't full price, but it wasn't bad. It was pretty decent, and he should have taken it, in my opinion. And I was trying to present it to him and trying to tell him this is a pretty good offer. And you want to sell a house, this has got all the stuff here and everything, and the numbers will work. And I mean, I was telling him all the stuff I could. I just couldn't get the guy to bite. My seller, he wouldn't even counter it. He just didn't want this, and I couldn't get him to make any adjustment on the price at all. And so the house never sold. The listing expired, and I was out of there, and we never closed. And that could be certainly the case for anybody in this situation. It's the same thing like when you go on a listing appointment and you want to get that, you won't get the listing. Or those are the kind of things where you get the listing and you don't succeed when the offers come in because the sellers don't want to come down and stuff like that. So it's almost like we have to prepare them right up front or right at the very beginning, for the different ways that this stuff can go. But it could really, really matter right here, this kind of stuff. So I want to encourage you guys to really be strong. And I think a big part of it here, guys, at the end, is all the angles. Cover all the angles. Look at all the angles. Where's the buyer agent coming from? Where's the buyer or seller coming from? Things like that. What's going to happen if they do it this way, how will it affect this other thing over here? Any little angle that you can see and consider will inform you and will help you put together a strategy that will work. Okay. Guard against negotiation fever, where the sellers feel that going back with a counteroffer is part of the game. If you think the price is reasonable, encourage sellers not to keep pushing. That's a fact too. You can run buyers right out of the deal. You can offend buyers. Sellers can get offended with low offers coming in, but you can offend buyers too. And playing the game, you know, when they write a real good, strong offer, stuff like that, to go to counter them all over the place, maybe you even counter back over full price and stuff like that and all that, the buyers can be like insulted. Like, what the heck? You know, we came in strong, this guy's got it on this way, we came in, we gave him this, we gave him that, we gave him all the stuff he asked for, and now he wants more stuff. You know, forget this guy. So, in that sense too, that's a great way to work. A lot of your negotiation can be better and more effective with preparation. It doesn't just have to be at the time where you're presenting the offer to the seller, or that time when you're presenting the offer to the listing agent. That's not the only time where negotiation occurs. You can talk about some of the objections and some of the things that may happen before that time ever comes around, so that when the offers do come in, you can reference back to that. Remember how I said that this is potentially going to happen, and here's what we do with that. And they'll say, oh yeah, I remember how you said that. Of course they remember, because you said that. That means then that it gives you some credibility with it. You saw it coming a mile away because you're good at this, you know what's coming, here's some of the angles, here's plan A, that here's a few different ways this could play out, Mr. Client, and then when they play out this way, you can remind them, remember Mr. Client, how I warned you, here's some different scenarios or whatever, here we are. Then it looks like it's a credibility factor for you too, and it will help them, especially when we need credibility in order to get clients, but we also need credibility for our clients to listen to us after we've got them. So I want him to have enough credibility to hire me to list his property, but I also want enough credibility so that when I tell him, listen, we should probably come down off of that price some and take this guy, that he'll listen to me. And I had a deal here not too long ago where they didn't. The offer was real good, and they don't want to listen, and if they don't listen, then we don't close. And that's no good. And sometimes in that sense, people are in their own way. They're obstructing their own deal and stuff like that. We have to counsel them as to what kind of strategies are going to get the result that they've hired us to get, and what kind of strategies are going to take us away from that. Okay, let's see. Work with the sellers to look for options to unacceptable contingency clauses. As long as the contingency exists, there really isn't a contract. So if it's contingent on another house selling, maybe there's a few different ways we can go. Maybe if they can buy without selling their house, then we can just go ahead and they can execute their purchase now, and they could sell that thing in their leisure, and we can just make them do it that way because we're not interested in taking their contingent offer. Or maybe there's a rent-back situation that can be done, or different stuff like that. Owner carries and different stuff like that aren't really going to be good options, I think, for alternatives, but a lot of times there are alternatives. That's another thing I want to encourage you guys with offering on property is sometimes there are alternatives that people hadn't thought of before, or maybe they seem a little out there and stuff like that. I don't want to encourage you guys to concoct any kind of crazy situation and crazy deal that you can think of, because those are the kind of things that get people in trouble. And then at the very least can create a whole awful lot of headaches. So, do you have a question? Okay. So we want to avoid that a little bit. Okay. Help their sellers put a lower price offer into perspective. On a $200,000 home, an offer of $198 is only a 1% reduction. That's a great way to look at it. It's not a thing of somebody's trying to take $2,000 from me. I don't want anyone to take $2,000 from me. But if it's you frame it that way, then we hate this guy at $198 because he's not paying $200. He's trying to rip us off. However, on the other way, if we present it that it's a 1% reduction, that's a much more reasonable thing. All right, that's like offering 99 cents instead of $1. Okay. Also consider the old saying, your best offer is your first offer. The reasoning behind this cliche is the longer their house sits on the market, the lower subsequent offers will come in at. And let me tell you, my friends, that is a fact. I've seen it play out. This is my 18th year in the business. I've seen that happen again and again and again. So a lot of times your best offer is your first offer. And if that first offer doesn't go, sometimes there either isn't one, a second one, or the second one is substantially less attractive, and that's no fun. Okay. It only stands to reason that a decent offer today is worthy of strong consideration, as the next offer may never come in at all. Encourage sellers to weigh the offer based on their own urgency to sell the home and the time the house has been on the market. Remind them that as long as the property is on the market, they will continue to have to make mortgage payments. Further, their elation for moving into their new home will also be postponed. So that could be a nice thing too, where sellers sometimes they don't want to make concessions or give things away or move on price. But Mr. Seller, if we can get this deal done right here, I know it doesn't quite get you all the money that it's going to get you, but look, it's going to get you into your house. We'll be able to close on that thing here. Maybe we've got another property under contract, but we can't really follow through on that because we're waiting for our current property to to sell. Listen, Mr. Seller, if this goes under, we can go on to the next one, right? That kind of stuff. Or if it's especially on a vacant property, listen, if we can just get this sold, you can stop making mortgage payments. Because it could be this offer's a little bit low, but if we have to sit around for the next 2 or 3 months, it could be that we're going to lose just as much anyway, sitting around for the next 2 or 3 months. And if we go that route, in 2 or 3 months from now, this offer's not going to be here, we will have made 2 or 3 more mortgage payments, and we still may not have a buyer at all. Or we may get another offer 2 or 3 months from now that's even way lower than this one, especially because we've been sitting around on the market like a shop-worn turkey. Okay? So those are the things that, you know, when you present it that way, maybe this offer is much more attractive to Mr. Seller than it looked like at first glance. And it makes sense. People make trade-offs in a negotiation, right? You make concessions. You'll give them a little bit of this in order to get a little bit of that. That's easy stuff that any of us can make sense out of. And so maybe it helps to just do some common sense stuff with your seller or your buyer that, hey, this is how it's done. These are the way that we make concessions, isn't it? Isn't that how, you know, a little bit of this and a little bit of that, you know, push and pull, making trade-offs and stuff. And the seller, and you say, does that make sense? And the seller says, oh yeah, that makes sense, of course. Great. Let's talk about concessions that we need you to make. You know what I mean? So by preparing them for the negotiation involves trade-offs, then when we start talking about the offer, and we start talking about trade-offs that you have to make, remember how we said that we're going to have to do that a minute ago? Yeah, that's great. So then now we can do that even though the seller may want to resist. Okay, a little bit more, and we're almost done. Handling multiple offers, we kind of talked about some of this. Unless the seller says not to bring offers under a certain price, you must present all written offers, no matter how unattractive. Get it in writing from the seller if he instructs you not to present certain kinds of offers at a certain price point or whatever. Present all offers promptly. Don't sit on an offer because a better one might come along. Like we said, that was discourteous. Present offers in the order they were submitted to the listing broker. I like to do that just because early bird gets the worm. I think if the first guy comes in, I like to give him first crack at it. If they're not the best buyer, they're not going to be the buyer that succeeds, but I at least want to give them a good shot at it because they were at least quick on the draw. So, and I'll tell you what, there's a value to that too. You know, if you think about it, when you're thinking about the other agent, is this agent going to be good to work with or not so good to work with? Look at this agent's on the spot. They're the first one that got the offer, and that can be a factor too. On the other hand, if they're the 18th person to get an offer in, maybe they're already really out in the cold. And so maybe for you, when you're trying to ask yourself, how can you present your buyer and your buyer's situation to the other side as awesomely as possible, one of the ways that you might be able to do that is to be more expeditious and to be presenting earlier and not be the 18th offer in on. Okay. As much as you can, you want to try and do those things. Make sure all salespeople and buyers understand your procedure for handling multiple offers. Inform them that theirs is not the only offer. That's the highest and best that I mentioned. People appreciate that a whole lot. Present multiple offers with all parties present, unless the seller requests otherwise. It really helps to have, if you've got more than one person on title, to try and have everybody present at the same time. Or at least the decision makers might be, you got 2 or more people on title, but you've got only one decision maker and everybody else just defers to that decision maker, that's fine. You'll still need everybody's signatures, but the decision maker is the one you want to be reviewing with. Okay, equate all offers in understandable terms. Price is not the only consideration. Discount points, settlement dates, down payment amounts, contingency clauses, financing provisions, and repair allowances can tip the scales. That's why I say too, repair allowances or carpet cleaning and stuff like that, I don't like to put those in my offers when I write an offer. I don't want to muddy it up, I'll ask for it later. In certain cases, I might even write the check myself, just to have it done myself so that I can get them into the deal if I have to. Equating offers in understandable terms, I think, is really important because we have a lot of legalese that we do, and they've really tried to clean up the contract so it's pretty easy to read, but still seems like an awful lot of fine print and everything. So I really want to help you guys zero in on the bottom line stuff for them, present it to them in an understandable fashion. It will help the negotiations because if they're confused, how can they decide? How can we decide how to respond to this offer or to these offers and we're not really clear on everything? So confusion must not be present in order to make those decisions, and we have to make sure that we're presenting the stuff with clarity. Okay. Remember all the variables presented, they collectively should be weighed and determined as to which one can most likely execute the conditions of their contract. And I could not have said it better. Which one is most likely to close? You know, not only does the seller want to close, and he's hired you to get him to the closing table. So that's the name of the game. He's hired you, and you're going to be well paid for doing it. So it's really important that you get this thing to the closing table. That's the result. That's the bottom line. And so which one of these people are most likely to execute? They're going to be effective. They're going to meet the terms that they're saying that they're going to meet in the contract. And at the closing date, they're going to show up with the money that they're supposed to have. And this thing is going to go. Because even if a guy is willing to pay $20,000 more than the other guy, if the $20,000 guy can't perform, then his $20,000 is an illusion. It's useless. It's a trick. It doesn't exist. And so that has to be a huge, huge factor. And once again, like I said, the competency of the agent that wrote it has something to do with whether or not it's going to close. If that agent's competent, squared away, and their offer is clean as a whistle, that matters. I feel real good about that, and I'll even tell the seller about that. I'll point out to the seller, this is a clean, well-written contract, Mr. Seller. I like it. I think that we should, this is a guy that knows what he's doing. Yes, sir.
Of everything we've said today, that is the most important point you should all take away with you, is that you have to be very diligent when you're working with that seller and not be embarrassed by it not closing. Let's say you get 4 offers in, okay? And granted, one is higher priced. You know it can't appraise. You get one offer in where it's right at the appraisal price you know it's going to come in at. 20% down. Specific performance contract is what they're offering. Oh my, okay. And then you have people that offer even more than that. And anyhow, which one do you think is going to execute that contract? The specific performance contract. So it's the most important thing.
It's a good point.
Down with the seller.
I'm going to mention something else to tie onto that comment there from Randy about, like, if you've got somebody that's willing to pay cash $20,000 over, or if we're worried about appraisal, they wouldn't be a cash buyer. But if you've got a guy that's getting financing and he's willing to pay $20,000 over, and you've got somebody else that's willing to to pay full price, and your seller wants to go with the guy that's $20,000 over full price, and you don't think it would appraise, there's a couple things you can do. One, of course, is the clause that if it doesn't appraise, the buyer will make up the difference. The other thing you can do to protect your seller, especially if we're sweating appraisal stuff, is to make it so that the earnest money is going to be non-refundable after a certain point. It might be non-refundable right up front, or non-refundable after a certain point, like after inspection, so that if it doesn't appraise and he doesn't want to bring the money, or it turns out he had a lot of bluster and said he's got all this money but he really doesn't, he's really screwing everybody around and wasting everybody's time or whatever, you've got that earnest money and the contract's already got built in as non-refundable. So at least you've got that for your seller, and then you go and find a legit buyer. So if you've got guys, the more your buyer has big promises and stuff like that, and all that, then the more you might want, you needs to be investigated, and or even locked down with like a non-refundable earnest money. Because sometimes when people come in with a lot of bluster and they're going to pay the most and they've got it all and whatever like that, and they're just blowing everybody else out the door, a lot of times it's an act, and it's like a ploy, and in real life they are what we call big hat, no cattle. They can't bring it home, they can't execute. and if they can't execute, then they're wasting our time, they're wasting everybody's time. Just going to crack into a couple of other notes that I have, and then we'll be about done. Try to keep emotions at bay. I want to, when I work with my sellers especially, and sometimes whether it's buyer or seller, I'll let them know this is an emotional process. We're human beings, we're not robots, we're not machines. We feel the way we feel about our home, we feel the way we feel about the home we're trying to get, things like that, and it's a factor. But Mr. Seller especially, this is business. We're doing math, okay? X minus Y equals Z. It's not about, I know you did magical stuff and you use the gold paint and you have all the family memories and stuff like that, but that's a completely separate thing now. And what we have right now is some math and X, Y, Z stuff, and that is it. And so let's keep our eye on that, because these buyers, they don't know you, they don't know your house, they don't understand some of the special stuff there. They've seen 20 houses around this area kind of like yours. Some of them are better, some of them not as good, or whatever, in different ways. This is just business to them. There's whatever, if they've come in and there's something about their offer you don't like, it's not something to be offended about or anything like that. And I think that it's an important thing there because we really do want to, prevent that kind of drama. I don't want my sellers and buyers to be offended by each other. And so the main thing that I utilize for that is to encourage them to, well, put yourself in their shoes. Would you want that? You know what I mean? They're coming in, your house isn't, nobody's even lived here for a while or whatever. It's been a rental for years. They have no idea about the furnace and hot water heater or whatever, and they're coming in asking for a home warranty. Isn't that kind of reasonable, Mr. Seller? That's not that bad, right? It's pretty reasonable on their end. And so now, instead of the seller being offended about the home warranty, maybe he can see where the buyers are coming from with it. So that kind of stuff can really help you, at least, encourage your client to see the other client's point of view as they're negotiating, because then it will prevent them from asking for unreasonable, ridiculous things that the other party would never consider in the whole world. Why don't ask the other guy for that thing that you know is going to not go? You can just ask him, listen, if you were the buyer on the other side, would you take that thing that you're telling them to take? And they say, no, I would never do that. Well, then they're not going to do it either. Let's not ask them for it, right? And sometimes they actually have to go through that train of thought to realize that they're being unreasonable or they're making demands and running off the buyer. Okay. I really like to ask the client or the other agent to send along comps when they're going to bring me a low offer on my listing. Hey, do you have any comps you want to send along to support your offer? I really like that. And one other thing I guess I would point out is that perception to me, in my experience, perception is reality. Well, however they perceive it, that's how it is. It doesn't matter how it really is, or it doesn't matter how you know it is because you're the real estate professional, or it doesn't matter how the other party thinks it is or whatever. Your client, if they perceive a certain way, that is it. And so what we have to do is we have to be able to change that perception. If they perceive that the buyers are coming in hostile and insulting and stuff like that, and the buyers have insulted them, that's their perception. It doesn't matter if the buyer's intended to or not. It doesn't matter if you're looking at it being like, I don't see the insult. If the seller says, I'm insulted by the offer, then they're insulted, right? Their perception is now the reality. They're insulted now. So I'm gonna, even if it seems ridiculous, I might have to go through and say, what is the thing that seems to be bothering you, and how can we backtrack it here or whatever? Or maybe we consider that I can see that you're offended because the price is low on this offer that come in, but Mr. Seller, they're looking at this, they're looking at that, they've got kids, whatever things like that, and it can help them change their perception. So I think that's what I kind of want to wrap up with, is just simply that the perception of the parties it dominates the process. And so we need to help them to perceive that the other party is their friend, okay? If you're working with the buyer and we're going to make an offer, we're going on the seller, they're our adversary because they're trying to get the most for the property and we're trying to pay the least and everything, but they are also a friend of ours because they've got the house we want and they're willing to sell it to us, right? If I'm Mr. Seller, or I'm representing the seller, I will tell you, Mr. Seller, that buyer is our friend. Because we need to sell this house. We need this house gone. And this guy's willing to do that for us. This guy's willing to come in and bring the money and everything like that. So we want to cooperate. We're not enemies. We're not at odds necessarily. They're trying to jockey for position and get this dollar, and you're on the other end of the spectrum for that. But in the end, we still do all want to go and move towards the same goal. And by painting it in that light, then that can help take away some of the adversarial elements and get